It was around 2 p.m. The sun blazed overhead, casting sharp shadows on the bustling streets of Calabar. The air was thick with heat and noise, car horns blaring non-stop, street hawkers calling out to passengers, and people weaving through traffic, drenched in sweat. She stood at a busy junction, waiting for a chance to cross. Nothing about her stood out, just a young woman in simple clothes, holding a small plastic bag, looking tired and worn. Then she noticed an old woman on the opposite side of the road, struggling to step forward. Her legs trembled with each move, and her eyes darted nervously at the speeding cars. Without thinking, the girl stepped forward, gently took the woman's arm, and said softly, "Mama, let me help you cross." "God bless you, my daughter," the woman whispered with relief. Together, they moved slowly, carefully through the chaos. Just as they reached the other side, the girl's elbow brushed against the side mirror of a sleek black Mercedes-Benz parked at the curb. She didn't even notice. But the door suddenly flew open. A man stepped out, his face twisted in anger. He was tall, sharply dressed in a tailored black suit and shiny shoes, dark sunglasses hiding his eyes, the kind of man who looked like he always got what he wanted. "Are you stupid?" He backed, yanking off his sunglasses to glare at her. She froze, confused, still holding the old woman's hand. "Sir, you touched my car. Do you even know how much this car cost?" he shouted, stepping closer. She glanced at the car, unsure, her voice barely audible. "Sir, I didn't even realize." Before she could finish, his hand whipped across her face. The slap rang out loud and sharp. The street stopped. Conversations died. Heads turned. Her cheek flushed red almost instantly. The plastic bag slipped from her hand and dropped softly to the ground. She stood there, stunned, eyes wide in disbelief. Her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. "Look at you," the man sneered, pointing at her. "People like you, always touching things you can't afford. Do you even know who I am?" She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, but no words came out. Only silence. Her cheek burned. Her eyes welled up. A few people in the crowd shook their heads. Some looked away. Others held up their phones, recording, silent witnesses. But no one stepped forward. No one said a word. The old woman, still holding her hand, gave it a gentle squeeze and whispered, "My daughter, leave him. God is watching." Slowly, the girl bent down and picked up her plastic bag from the ground. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "Mama, let's just go." She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just turned around, head lowered, her pride quietly crumbling inside her. Humiliated. Ashamed. The crowd stood in silence, watching her walk away with quiet dignity. The old woman by her side gripped her arm tightly, like she was holding her together. The man in the suit let out a loud, irritated hiss, wiped the mirror of his car with a spotless white handkerchief, then slid into the driver's seat. He slammed the door hard and drove off, like nothing had happened. But what he didn't know was this. The girl he'd just humiliated in front of everyone was no ordinary girl. In fact, he'd soon know her name. He'd soon see her face again, everywhere. Her name was God's Grace. She had only been back in Nigeria for 2 weeks after spending 7 years studying in London. She wasn't some poor girl from the streets, far from it. Her father was Chief Ekoma Ototo, one of the wealthiest and most respected businessmen in Calabar. He owned several large companies, and everywhere he went, people stood in awe. But God's Grace didn't return home to flaunt her background or bask in luxury. She was tired of the way people were judged by their clothes, their accents, their wallets. So, she decided to do something different. A quiet experiment. She dressed simply, like any regular girl, to see how the world would treat her when no one knew her name. And now, she had her answer. She could still see his face, the anger, the disgust in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was beneath him. Tears welled up again, but she wiped them away quickly. She had promised herself, long ago, that she wouldn't cry over people who didn't see her worth. But her heart ached. And not just from the slap. Sitting alone in her room, she stared into the mirror. She gently touched her cheek. It still stung, but not nearly as much as her pride. Across town, in a sleek glass office building, the man who slapped her walked into his corner office like it was just another day. His name was Ezekiel, a young, successful CEO running a high-end fashion brand called Luxwear. People respected him, envied him. Some even feared him. He had everything: money, fame, power. But inside, he felt nothing. He was cold, arrogant, distant. And he'd convinced himself that was the price of success. He didn't remember the girl. Didn't remember the look on her face. To him, she was just another nobody in the way. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, dove into meetings, took calls, made decisions. And the incident? Gone from his mind. But fate had other plans, bigger, stranger plans. Because while they both went on with their lives, somewhere behind the scenes, their parents were putting together a future neither of them saw coming. 2 days later, Chief Ekoma Ototo called God's Grace into his private study. He looked at her with a softness in his eyes. "My daughter," he said gently, "there's something I need to tell you." She sat down slowly. "What is it, Dad?" He took a deep breath. "Since you were a child, I made an agreement with an old friend, Mr. Agbo. We decided, one day, you would marry his son. It was meant to strengthen our family businesses." Hila blinked, stunned. "Dad, you never told me this before." "I know," Chief Ekoma said gently. "I wanted you to finish your studies first. But the time has come. Both families have agreed to introduce you two at a private dinner tomorrow night." God's Grace didn't argue. She trusted her father. If he had chosen this man, there had to be a good reason. Across town, at nearly the same moment, Ezekiel sat in his parents' living room, facing something similar. "Ezekik," his father began, his voice firm, "it's time for you to settle down. We arranged your marriage when you were young. She's Chief Ototo's daughter, comes from one of the wealthiest and most respected families in the country." Ezekiel frowned. "Wait, you arranged this without even asking me?" "Yes," his father said without hesitation. "The decision already made. You'll meet her tomorrow night. She's smart, studied abroad, and very beautiful. Trust me, you'll thank me later." Ezekiel sighed, annoyed but knowing he had no choice. When his father made up his mind, there was no arguing. Neither Ezekiel nor God's Grace had the faintest idea they had already met, under the worst possible circumstances. They didn't know yet that they weren't just strangers arranged to be married, but childhood friends, once inseparable, before life tore them apart. That truth was waiting just around the corner, ready to unravel everything. The next evening, the families gathered at a quiet, high-end restaurant. The lighting was soft, the music low and smooth. Waiters glide between tables, carrying glasses and whispering orders. Everything felt calm, composed, perfect. God's Grace arrived first with her parents. She looked stunning in a fitted dress, her hair swept up, diamonds sparkling on her ears and wrist. No one would guess she was the same woman who had been humiliated in public just 2 days earlier. Minutes later, Ezekiel walked in with his parents. As always, he was sharply dressed, his face calm, a polite smile covering the frustration boiling beneath. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to marry someone he'd never even met. But he had to. His father had made that clear. The families exchanged greetings and warm handshakes. Everyone smiled, made small talk, laughed lightly. The mood was cheerful, at least, until the moment came. God's grace, Chief Ekama said with a proud smile, "This is Ezekiel Agbo, the young man we've told you so much about. Your husband-to-be." God's grace turned to face him, her expression calm, her smile gentle. But the second their eyes met, everything shattered. Her smile vanished. Her heart dropped. Her knees almost gave way. Standing right in front of her was the same man who had slapped her on the street. Ezekiel froze. His grin disappeared. His eyes narrowed as realization crept in slowly. No, it couldn't be. Silence gripped the table. Everyone was waiting, confused by the sudden tension. "Is everything all right?" Chief Ekoma asked, his brow furrowed. "Yes," Ezekiel said quickly, his voice strained. "We are just surprised, that's all." God's grace didn't respond. Her thoughts were racing. Anger, shame, betrayal, all swirling inside her chest. Fate had played the cruelest trick. As the parents began casually discussing wedding plans, blissfully unaware, the storm inside their children was growing. "Excuse me," God's grace said suddenly, her voice trembling. "I need some fresh air." She stepped onto the balcony, her hands shaking. A moment later, Ezekiel followed her out, desperate to say something, anything. They stood in silence, the city glowing beneath them. Finally, she turned to him. Her eyes were icy. "Did you even recognize me that day?" Ezekiel looked down, ashamed. He tried to speak but the words stuck in his throat. "You slapped me in front of everyone," she continued, voice tight with pain. "You humiliated me. And now we're just supposed to act like none of that happened." "God's grace," he started. But she cut him off. "You didn't even know who I was. But it shouldn't have mattered. You didn't have to know me to treat me with respect." The words hit him hard. She was right. He couldn't deny it. And nothing he said would make it go away. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at the ground. "I can't change what happened." God's grace stared at him for a long moment. "You're not the boy I used to know," she whispered, her voice barely holding back the pain. Ezekiel looked up quickly, confused. "What do you mean, the boy you used to know?" She hesitated, suddenly aware of what she'd let slip. Her eyes dropped to the ground as she sighed. "Ezekiel, you really don't remember me, do you?" Years ago, God's grace and Ezekiel had been inseparable, best friends in the village. They spent every day under the big mango tree, sharing food, secrets, and loud, carefree laughter. Then everything changed. God's grace father sent her abroad for school. On her last day, they sat quietly under that same tree, holding hands and promising they'd never forget each other. Before she left, she pressed her favorite bracelet into his hand, something to remember her by. But life went on. The letters stopped. Time passed. Childhood promises faded. They grew up, and with that, the closeness they once had disappeared. Now, standing in front of each other again after so many years, the weight of those lost moments hit them hard. Ezekiel's heart pounded. Her voice, it suddenly sounded so familiar. "Your God's grace." "From the village?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yes," she said softly, eyes glistening. "The same God's grace you slapped without even looking at her." He froze. Her words hit him like thunder. Guilt flooded in, heavy and cold. He couldn't believe it. The girl he had humiliated so harshly, the woman he was supposed to marry, was the same girl who had once meant the world to him. She was the only one who had ever loved him purely, back when he had nothing. And now, he might have ruined everything. After the confrontation, God's grace felt shattered. She couldn't forget his angry face, the sting of his slap, or the bitter words he had thrown at her. It cut deeper than anything, that the boy who once protected her had become the man who hurt her in public, without hesitation. Ezekiel couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. The guilt consumed him. He sent flowers, long messages, heartfelt apologies. She ignored them all. The wounds were still raw. Their families noticed the tension. Everyone feared the marriage would fall apart. His mother pleaded with God's grace to forgive, but all she could say was, "I don't recognize the boy I once loved." Feeling lost, Ezekiel made a painful decision. He stood before everyone and said, "God's grace deserves better. If she forgives me, it has to be her decision, not pressure from anyone else." He stepped away, quietly. The sadness between them grew. And the hope that once shined so brightly began to dim. God's grace missed the boy he used to be. But her pride, her pain, they kept her from reaching out. Both of them felt broken, unsure if those old wounds could ever truly heal. Months passed. God's grace threw herself into charity work, helping others, trying to move forward. Then one day, she heard about a new youth shelter in town, the Foundation. It had been built anonymously. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she went to see it for herself. What she found left her speechless. There was Ezekiel. Quietly walking, playing with the kids, teaching, laughing, truly laughing. He looked different. Softer. Humbled. Real. "I built this for you," he told her gently. "Not to win you back, but to thank you. You made me realize the man I never want to be again." His words hit deep. She could feel something shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, he really had changed. Weeks later, he came to her family home. He knelt respectfully, holding something small in his hand. It was the same bracelet. The one she gave him all those years ago. "Can you forgive me?" he asked quietly. "Let me spend my life making things right." Tears filled her eyes. So many memories came rushing back. She smiled, soft and full of emotion, and whispered, "Yes." They had a simple wedding, right under the same mango tree where it all began. Childhood promises found new meaning. Love returned. Scars healed. And the slap that once broke them became the start of a love story they'd carry in their hearts forever. Always treat others with kindness and respect, because sometimes fate turns strangers into family, and pride into deep regret. My besties, if you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you soon with another heartfelt tale.